Is it just me, or is the internet looking weirder than usual lately? I mean, the internet has always been weird, but this feels different. It's almost like kid stuff is taking over or something. Like you can't escape it no matter where you go. If there's any place you can see this happening clearly, it's horror. Horror is like a petri dish for this phenomenon. You can watch in real time as kids assimilate new ideas within the genre, warp them, and then spread them back out to the rest of the world. The backrooms were ruined by thousands of kids coming up with new monsters and new floors for them. If not for the SCP Wiki's careful review process, it would, by now, almost definitely be drowning in submissions from kids. Remember what kids did to creepypasta? In fact, there's an entire horror subgenre that's basically come to be defined by this interaction: mascot horror. We all know Five Nights at Freddy's. How could you not? Poppy Playtime, Bendy and the Ink Machine. It's all sort of uniquely positioned to look like it's for kids right from the start. And the more kids flock to it, the more tailor-made it appears to be for exactly that outcome. The more intentionally approachable it becomes to children, the stranger it becomes to everyone else. To me, this doesn't just look like kids taking an idea and making it weird. It looks like a spiral, descending down into a core of absurdity and insularity that you can only understand if you're already in the middle of it. And I have to wonder, where does it end? Sometimes the search for truth leads us down dark paths. I don't think anything I've studied for this show could ever prepare me for what I now need to talk about. I suppose if we really want to understand this weird relationship between kids and their media, there's no better place to start than Skibbity Toilet. I know it's kind of a tired thing to say at this point. Every newscaster and their geriatric cat has offered some kind of commentary on how perplexing and strange Skibbity Toilet is. And it is weird. I never thought Gmod YouTube poop would be serialized into a culture-defining phenomenon, but here we are. The confusion is understandable. That reaction is also, in a way, more interesting than Skibbity Toilet itself. As an adult looking at something like this, what do you make of it? The term I see applied a lot here is brain rot. It's not just that kids are consuming low-quality or poor-taste media now, it's that there's something wrong with it. It's making them dumber, making the world worse. At least adults know when they're looking at brain rot. An adult would have gotten the initial joke in Skibbity Toilet and moved on. Kids really don't seem to. They have a different way of understanding the world, which makes them especially vulnerable to it. And, okay, maybe Skibbity Toilet is a little silly to worry about in particular, but what if you apply all that same logic to something a little darker? I mentioned Poppy Playtime earlier. You may have heard of it. It's one of the most polished examples of a mascot horror game, kind of a flagship title. One of the monsters in the game, Huggy Wuggy, proved especially popular with kids, much to the concern of their parents. In 2022, horrified parents and teachers across multiple countries accused Poppy Playtime of corrupting their children. News outlets reported that kids would play a game where they hugged each other, whispering a sinister song Huggy Wuggy had taught them. The head of one British primary school called Huggy Wuggy a very deceiving character, as hugs should be seen as something kind and loving. Except, Huggy Wuggy doesn't even sing in Poppy Playtime. That song the kids were whispering, that was Free Hugs, a fan creation by YouTuber Tryhard Ninja. Turns out the panic over Poppy Playtime was about something that isn't even in the game. It's easy to assume that this whole situation is all just more of the same, parents responding to what they identified as brain rot, albeit of a darker variety. As a flagship piece of mascot horror, Poppy Playtime fits right in with content like Skibbity Toilet and all those weird Roblox kids games. I can see why anxious adults might naturally assume that kids were, once again, just mindlessly absorbing what the internet was feeding them. But regardless of where it came from, kids singing about murder is still pretty scary, right? There has to be something going on there. They're pretending to kill each other on the playground. No wonder their parents were upset. Actually, come to think of it, this is sort of familiar, isn't it? Haven't parents always kind of been anxious about this stuff? I'm thinking of the satanic panic of the 80s, the scare over comic books and rock music of the 50s. Even in the Victorian era, there was a concern that penny dreadfuls would lead children to a life of crime. The fact that adults have always worried about this kind of thing sort of also implies that kids have always done it, right? Before Poppy Playtime, kids were teaching each other songs about murdering Barney the dinosaur. And before that, they were summoning Bloody Mary and playing with Ouija boards. In fact, they're still doing all of that stuff to this very day. Now, kids who have never even seen Barney still pass down songs about killing him. It comes to them through other kids, classmates, siblings, friends. If they transfer schools, the stories, rhymes, and games come with them. And while kids have been trying to summon Bloody Mary for decades, no two rituals are the same. Nor are the stories about who Bloody Mary is or what she even does once you summon her. It almost sounds like folklore, doesn't it? I know when you think of folklore, it's easy to think of the old stuff. Ancient legends, mythology, campfire tales, famous cryptids like Bigfoot or Nessie, sacred rituals passed down across generations. All of those things are folklore, but folklore is modern, too. It's created every day, all the time, by everyone, even children. There's a word for this, actually. Childlore, a unique branch of anthropology dedicated to folklore created by kids. And it's more than just ghost stories and creepy rhymes. If you played hand-clapping games as a kid, if you traded trinkets like pogs or silly bands or crazy bones, if you and your friends pretended to be dragons or superheroes at recess, you were participating in folklore. According to media scholar Henry Jenkins, kids differ a little in their approach, though. They tend to create their folklore through a process that he calls poaching. They take something they're familiar with, like their favorite game or show, and adapt it into child lore by subverting it in some way. That's how you get Jingle Bells Batman Smells, creepypastas about Sonic the Hedgehog, kids pretending to be Huggy Wuggy. It's also how you get Skibbity Riz, Stanley Cups as a status symbol, weird infected My Little Pony OCs. For adults, this is all just brain rot. For kids, it's culture. A way for them to mature, form friendships, learn about the world on their own terms, from a frame of reference that they understand. Playing pretend lets them develop their imaginations. Spooky games help them face their fears in a fun, safe way. Even those songs about killing cartoon characters are a way to prove that they're growing up by challenging what adults think kids should be. Whether something is brain rot is really just a matter of perspective. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Kids and adults are bound to see things differently. And hey, sometimes child lore can get out of hand. Remember the Devious Licks thing a few years back, where kids were just destroying things and vandalizing their schools for views? Remember the Slender Man stabbing in 2014? Those two girls who stabbed a classmate, hoping to summon Slender Man? Expensive skincare products have become a mark of popularity for some kids who are fed impossible beauty standards from TikTok and Instagram. The call of the coveted influencer lifestyle is never far away. I think the internet is just kind of a big place, maybe a little too accessible in some ways. And there aren't really very many spaces dedicated to kids anymore. Gone are the days of Neopets and Webkins and Club Penguin. Kids are going to run across things they don't understand, and they're going to poach it. Whether that gets out of hand is less a matter of the internet rotting children's brains and, I think, more a matter of supervision. Adults do have a responsibility to help kids navigate this complex space more safely, while also allowing them the freedom to explore the culture of being a kid. As an adult, you can tell the difference between a skibbity toilet and a vandalism fad. Kids literally cannot. They lack the experience. That part is actually pretty simple to me. What I find really weird is when the opposite happens when adults poach child lore back. You may have heard of a little channel called Game Theory. Back in 2014, it sort of set a precedent by reading a little too much into the game Five Nights at Freddy's. Very quickly after this, for both the YouTubers and the kids watching at home, theory crafting became perhaps the primary way to engage with this game and its forthcoming sequels. In fact, immediately in the second installment, you can already see the impact of this, the game's leaning into the idea of hidden and fragmented lore. Now there are countless spin-offs, books, merchandise, even a movie, all feeding together into this Byzantine body of lore that is Five Nights at Freddy's, which also makes it the perfect poaching ground for kids. This is a franchise that has actively encouraged narrative diffusion, that wants you to take pieces of it and run away with them. And the kids have been happy to oblige. Lunchroom speculation about what they think is going on at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, playground rumors that it's a real place and searches for it on Google Maps, endless internet theory crafting of their own spiraling off into total kid brain absurdity. Five Nights at Freddy's is a generation-defining phenomenon. I don't think there was quite anything like it before. But boy, is there a lot of stuff like it now. Bendy and the Ink Machine, Hello Neighbor, Choo Choo Charles, My Friendly Neighborhood, Hello Puppets, Poppy Playtime, and hundreds, if not thousands of clones that you've probably never heard of. Which is fine. When something is this successful, you expect other people to draw inspiration from it. You also expect, as a matter of course, for a sort of formula to emerge. Which is more or less what happened. Establish some fictional place associated with kids, fill it with adorable, bloodthirsty monsters, allude to mountains of unseen lore to attract the YouTubers. Easy. It worked for Five Nights at Freddy's. How could you go wrong? Enter Garden of Banban. The game is set in a sort of kindergarten complex. It has lore, but even game theory seems to have found it ridiculous. I guess it does technically check all the boxes, but look at it. The scariest thing in this game is how much some of the monsters look like Gumby. Banban is a horror game, but it isn't horrifying. If anything, its blobby monsters and lazy scares signaled to fans that the entire genre was on the decline. It seemed to epitomize a trend in mascot horror, the growing desire to reflect their most profitable audience, kids. Any adult could see this happening, could see the target audience being pandered to, but kids continue to eat it up. Here's the fan wiki, which there is no way this wasn't written by a 10-year-old. So we see the spiral forming. Children poaching mascot horror, incorporating it into their folklore with their theories, fan art, and games. Mascot horror poaching child lore, integrating those childloric understandings, or at least trying to make itself appealing to them. Five Nights at Freddy's was once a simple story about possessed animatronics. Over time, the franchise became so complicated it's impossible to understand without a YouTuber explaining it to you. Banban followed the same recipe for a successful mascot horror game, but became the poster child for what not to do. Creators wanted this to work for them. To have a game theory video dedicated to your creation was, and I'm sure is still to this day, a crowning achievement in the world of mascot horror. In a now famous series of tweets, the developers of Hello Neighbor even begged game theory outright in public to make a theory video about their game. And, in a sense, they did get the virality they were after. The tweets came off to most viewers as painfully desperate for attention, and they were not shy about communicating this. The incident popularized Hello Neighbor's developers in the worst possible way imaginable. They were deemed cringe, all for trying to force the creation of folklore. I wouldn't wish that fate on anyone. I'm sure their game is great. But, it was weird, because folklore can't be forced. It has to develop naturally. That's what happened with the early Five Nights at Freddy's games. They may not have had that much lore to begin with, but fans enjoyed speculating and making their own. Where culture emerges, people engage with it. It's just what humans do. So this spiral we're seeing, it may actually be more dangerous for the developers than the kids. No doubt, kids picking up your idea and turning it into child lore is a short path to virality, but think of what you might sacrifice in that pursuit. Kids ultimately don't need you to appeal to them. They'll steal from you whether or not you follow the formula. Maybe it's better to just make something worth stealing. I said at the start that the internet has just been feeling weirder lately. I think that's true, but I don't think it's because kids create child lore. I think it's because, as a result of an ever more consolidated internet, adults are having to see it more often and just don't know what to do with it. I see people all the time construing skibbity toilet and mascot horror as existential threats, signs of the times, a problem that needs to be fixed somehow. Brain rot. But maybe it's just culture, a way for kids to understand their world, even if you don't understand it yourself. And if it is a culture you don't understand, why would you ever try to appropriate it? I mean, there wouldn't be a kids' horror spiral if no one was trying to poach child lore back. So maybe kids' stuff on the internet isn't really that weird. Maybe the adults are just making it weird. You know, even though child lore is nothing to be afraid of, childhood is actually pretty scary for you humans, right? It's where some of your deepest fears originate. In fact, one of my favorite authors ever, Junji Ito, draws pretty heavily on his own childhood for his work, which has resulted in perhaps some of the best horror ever made. We actually made a whole documentary about this process. It's part of our Worldsmith series, which you can find over on Nebula. Along with exclusive content like Worldsmiths, you can watch all of our usual videos there, ad-free, no sponsor spots at all. There's even older Foundry stuff over there that you won't find here on YouTube. And, this might surprise you, our future content is over there too. Don't want to wait for the next Foundry episode? You can watch it on Nebula right now, a whole week before it releases here on YouTube. Seriously, here it is, waiting for you to go watch it. Nebula is really nothing like YouTube. It's not just a platform, it's an enabler. It changes the paradigm of making video content online. Not only does it provide a place for us where we don't have to worry about demonetization or censorship, but Nebula actually pays for all the unique stuff we do over there. And there is a lot of unique stuff. They just recently released the final episode of a new series, The Getaway, where they sent 6 creators on a 600-mile road trip to win $10,000. The problem? There's a secret snitch among them, sabotaging everything they do. The other problem? They're all the snitch, and they just don't know it. It's legitimately such a delight to watch 6 YouTubers constantly getting in each other's way. Seriously, so fun. From original narrative dramas to game shows to podcasts to exclusive video essays to our series Worldsmiths, Nebula is just bursting with good stuff from good creators and growing all the time. The funny thing about Nebula offering so much is that somehow it's actually cheaper than almost any other service. Usually it's just $6 a month or $60 a year, but if you use our link go.nebula.tv/TaleFoundry, you'll get 40% off, bringing that low price down even further to just $36 a year, which comes out to just $3 a month. I've never heard of another streaming service that cheap. And when you inevitably love Nebula, they also have a unique way of allowing you to share that love. They give you guest passes to hand out. It's not a free trial, there's no payment info required or anything like that. You just give one of these things to a friend and they can come watch whatever they want on Nebula for free. No restrictions at all, and the creator behind that content will still get paid because Nebula rules. Again, visit go.nebula.tv/TaleFoundry to get Nebula for just $3 a month. We have so much content over there just waiting for you to go watch it. I really hope you will. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!